This week's episode was brought to you by Oscar Sevilla and Olive Frazier. Thank you, Oscar Sevilla and Olive Frazier. It's with the generous support of listeners like you that our team here at The Whole Rabbit gets to keep researching exotic forms of life which enter our dimension through toilet portals in limbo and survive off the ambient energy of dystopian ideation, which, if left unchecked, will begin to colonize the entire astral dimension like some gargantuan form of fungal depression that we harvest in small batches and sell to demons who trip out on this stuff and pay us in counterfeit diamonds. But they're indistinguishable from the real ones, so, if you'd like to help us keep smuggling fake diamonds using depression fungus or just hear the second half of this episode, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you this extended episode, but every single one of our extended episodes going back into 2019. But that's not all. I'll send you a 5x5 high-quality vinyl sticker of our big bunny Baphomet cover Saturnian cover art, whatever I just said, and you'll get the secret keys to our Discord server, where we discuss the many ways to turn that fluttery feeling in your tummy into laser beams you could shoot from your eyeballs. It's a lot of fun. If you're looking for cosmic insight, you can also subscribe to our $20 tier and get a tarot reading from yours truly each month you're subscribed. I guarantee it's the best tarot reading for the price anywhere outside of a music festival, and it smells better. Well, it smells like your living room. You get the idea. In this episode, we explore the most prolific occult lodge of the German-speaking world, the Fraternitas Saturni, delving deep into its quixotic metaphysics and dark philosophies. With Stephen Flowers as our guide, our journey begins in pre-World War Germany. Stars Aleister Crowley as the leading progenitor of the drama, which slithers into classic German expressionist film, spans 2 world wars, and threatens to reveal the hidden truth of this world. In the first half of the show, we dive into the history of the big occult names in Germany, the catastrophic influence Aleister Crowley had on the scene, and how the Fraternitas Saturni rose triumphantly from the ashes of the chaos. In the second half of the show, we dissect original cult documents to get a better idea of the ideas and esoteric philosophies inside the Fraternitas Saturni, which has remained a tightly held secret for generations. Lastly, by the end of this episode, I think it's quite possible you will totally understand why I bring up Star Wars so much on this show, because a number of the historical events we're talking about today are almost definitely inspiration for the prequels, the sequels, and the classic middle movies. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the show.
What lies between fear and sex?
What?
Fun.
What?
What do you call a pissed off German?
What?
Sauerkraut. I asked my German friend if he knew the square root of 81. He said no.
I don't. What?
Huh? How do you say 9 in German?
Oh, lol.
Oh, how you say? Oh. Now I get it.
A German tourist jumped in the freezing water to save my dog. He climbed out. He said, "Here is the dog. Dry him off and keep him warm. He will be fine." I asked him, "Are you a vet?" He said, "Vet? I'm soaking."
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just tell you that
Star Wars is thelema for kids and just let you enjoy your childhood in peace. Nay, we lurk, withdraw,
and suddenly pounce into the German occult scene
100 years ago to discover how a bunch of Saturn-worshipping, Aleister Crowley-inspired, Bavarian Illuminati enjoyers completely rewrote history as we know it, caused 2 world wars, jump-started our favorite pulp cultural mythologies, and still exist in relative obscurity today because this week we're exploring the Fraternitas Saturni, or as it's known in our mother's tongue, the Brotherhood of Saturn. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as the Hack Rabbit. I'm joined this week by the Corgi Queen of Cassiopeia, Marisama.
Cassiopeia.
The abyssal black core of the solar logos, Malachor 5.
I hope there's no pilonidal cysts in the abyss.
And the avatar of the Medimi mood matrix, Heka Astra.
Hello.
Researching this was a little bit more exciting than I thought it would be.
Oh, hell yeah. Saturn is pretty cool and spooky at the same time. Kind of checks off a lot of the boxes for the metalhead.
It's got everything you could ever want spooky about it in religion, conspiracy theory, and even find it in movies. It's everywhere.
Especially sci-fi movies involving time travel or
Yes.
meddling with time, which I find the most interesting about Saturn.
I think a lot of people have an immediate negative reaction to Saturn in the same way that they have negative reactions to certain tarot cards. I personally think that Saturn can and is as beautiful as any other planetary energy.
Well, we're going to be talking about why it's the best energy all time ever could be.
So, in the past, we did an episode that we called The Black Cross of Saturn, and it is possibly the most, hey kids, you want to learn about some secret occult stuff of this very deeply hidden topic that's found throughout pretty much everything in Western occultism and perhaps society in general. This might even go as far back as, well, for sure, Rome and the Greeks.
Absolutely.
So it kind of isn't a surprise that that Black Cross of Saturn episode is one of the most liked or listened to episodes in the whole entire Whole Rabbit library. So that being said, the Saturn Gnosis, as I'll call it here for now, that we're going to be talking about today, the one sacred to the Fraternitas Saturni, is related to the Black Cross of Saturn, the Black Cube as well, all that symbolism that is featured in that previous episode. But for the Fraternitas Saturni, they have a somewhat of a highly nuanced approach to working with or in the sphere of Saturn's force.
And so, yeah, check out the Black Cross of Saturn episode if you want to hear our deep cuts. We all brought a lot to the table. Hecka has some of her best work in there, and we're going to repeat a little bit of it, but not that much. But it is relevant to what we're talking about, and you would gain more from this topic by checking that one out. So anyway, our source for this episode, though, is Stephen Flower's Fraternitas Saturni, and it's chock full of rituals and spells and all sorts of useful material for people that do magic or just want to know about magicians. And we don't have time to discuss all the stuff that's in that book because the main storyline is just too full of interesting plot points that we cannot miss. The story of the Fraternitas Saturni is not only fascinating, but it's an important one at that. As I researched, I found a number of big puzzle pieces coming together, and at times it felt like the whole rabbit was looking into a mirror whose reflection spanned back centuries or more. So if you're disposed of the idea of the whole rabbit being a spiritual family of sorts, you're going to see some funny overlaps. Even if we maybe have a public profile and don't take ourselves that seriously, there's lots of overlaps. Now, one big thing we do on this show is explore the esoteric nature of Thelema and its exoteric effects, since it was first unleashed on the world after Aleister Crowley and his wife, Rose Edith Kelly, received the Book of the Law in Cairo in Egypt in 1908. According to occult lore, this was said to announce the coming of a new Aquarian age for humanity, which, in retrospect, seems to have coincided with a widespread revolution in human affairs that culminated in the first two world wars and is now on the brink of a third. Oh boy, maybe more often than I should, I love to point out that Star Wars seems to be a science fiction mythologization of these events, and by the end of this episode, I hope you will see why I do that so much. The key to unraveling this epic tale begins with the most active and important magical society in Germany today, the Fraternitas Saturni, whose formal beginnings around 1926 up until around 1970 were almost entirely secret. Then, sometime in the early 70s, by what Flowers describes as a quirk of fate, documents detailing the secret order and its rituals were leaked to the public and published for the world to see. If you could read German, that is.
Wait, who is Flowers again?
That's a good question, Hecka. Stephen Flowers wrote Fraternitas Saturni, which is our academic source for our information about this lodge, and he was once the leader of the Temple of Set, so he's friends with Don Webb and Aquino and, that group of people.
Right. He's got a PhD in Germanic cultures and stuff, archaeology, all these different fields of study about their culture, Scandinavian culture, I believe, too. He's a very Norse and Gaelic, Germanic researcher. He's got a PhD.
And he loves the runes. He's very into this stuff, if you will. He's a good source.
Yeah, he's possibly the best rune researcher.
So the information presented in Stephen Flowers' book and in this episode are based largely on these volumes of leaked source documents, which sound like they took considerable effort to organize, translate, and make sense of, an endeavor left unconquered in the English-speaking world. That is, until now. Almost as if to tantalize, Stephen Flowers confirms for us that he has personally known a number of magicians who, even when grounded in another current of magic, were able to attain a number of results using the Saturnian formulae found within these secret documents. By the end of the episode, hopefully we will too.
Cool. Yeah, and just from my perspective, I had heard about the FS from a friend of a friend, who is now my friend, that is a member of the OTO and the AA, apparently. And this one time we talked about David Lynch's work, and in this conversation, I was asking him what's up with the Black Lodge and its members, which kind of are featured as the bad guys throughout all of David Lynch's work. And he jokingly said to me, "Oh, you mean the Fraternitas Saturni?" And I was a little bit puzzled, as I hadn't heard of this order, at least by that name. I had heard of the Black Brotherhood, Brothers of Saturn. I didn't know it was like a German order, right? And he handed me a book that was written by Don Webb, the guy who wrote Energy, Magic of the Vampire that we covered a few weeks ago. And this book was called Overthrowing the Old Gods, which has a small paragraph or so about the FS, explaining how the order is, of course, left-hand path. And he also gave me some other insight into the FS, or at least some of the individuals involved in the FS were actually integral parts of the production of the 1922 vampire film Nosferatu, the very iconic version of Nosferatu we all know and love today. So this all kind of got my head spinning a bit, because it does make sense in some of Lynch's work, of course, and I love vampires, and I love dark, deathly things, and kind of just started talking about this compassionist love and, you know, abyss topics with the Discord chat, and snowballed into an episode that's actually pretty awesome.
I had not heard of this order before it was brought up for this episode.
We'll get into it, but if you love film, especially classic film, or especially German expressionistic film from the 1920s, this episode should have something for you, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, like, I feel like I've heard the name in passing, but usually in media it's referred to as the Brotherhood, or like in Lynch's work, the Black Lodge, or perhaps the Dark Brotherhood. But I feel like that this order, from what little I've read, is kind of like the trope of the guys in the black robes where you can't see their face.
A lot of interesting roads lead back here, so let's get into it. Now, generally, it might be said that the Golden Dawn has been to the Anglo-American occultist world over the past 100 years, what the Fraternitas Saturni has been to occultism in the German-speaking world, with its own unique blend of cosmology, astrology, neo-pagan demonology, sexual occultism, and a hierarchy of ranks and duties similar to Masonic organizational structure, replete with 33 degrees of initiation. That sounds like a lot.
Sounds familiar.
It does. This particular and somewhat unique arrangement of ideas and practices is said to have burst forth from the mind of the Brotherhood's longtime Grand Master, Gregor A. Gregorius. It's a great name. According to Flowers,
Gregorius fostered a vibrant current of Thelemic philosophy and practice, which remained secure from public scrutiny for almost 40 years. He was safe to pursue the directions and consequences of Thelema, free of the influence of mediocre philosophies that elsewhere stultified and prevented it from reaching its ultimate aeonic unfoldment.
this begs the question, what sort of rare occult mutant philosophy is being celebrated in these spooky German lodges? On the outset, it seems like Aleister Crowley's contributions to the occult scene are not entirely absent. For instance, Fraternitas Saturni used a variation of love is the law, love under will, similar to English thelema.
I'm not a native German speaker, so I'm not going to butcher the language. There's a particular part of what I'm about to say that isn't translated from German into English with the full intentions of the native tongue. So let's just hear it, right? In the FS, they say, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. Love is the law, love under will, compassionless love. And like I said earlier, this sort of puzzled me for a bit. What the hell is compassionless love?
I feel like, at least this is just from my perspective, that maybe something that would translate better would be something close to love without pity. I've said for years that pity is for the pathetic, and so I don't offer pity until it's at a point of no return. So if you pity somebody, it's because you find that they are pathetic and unable to do for themselves. So I kind of feel like loving without pity is not necessarily compassionless.
I kind of get what you're saying, because when you pity someone, it's almost that you find them disgusting. Like, that is part of the emotion.
Right. Well, because also compassion is a part of love.
To me, compassionless love is saying, can you love something that you're disgusted by or that seems offensive? Like,
Right.
can you find the beauty and the silver lining in something that's disgusting or abhorrent? Similar to, I guess, unconditional love, like love for everything,
Yeah.
regardless of whether you describe it good or bad, or, you know.
I think that's kind of where I'm headed, is saying that unconditional love is not a pitying kind of love, and that to love unconditionally, you really have to become one with what you find to be abhorrent, and you end up loving that as well in its own healthy right way. If something is so far beyond being lovable, it is in a point of being pathetic, and therefore pity is for the pathetic. It's not united.
You're actually right on the money, Hecka. One of the other words that translates to compassionless is pity. So talk about this a bit, right? Because after reading this book, I got a better idea of what is actually meant here. And my determination on this is that it means a tough love approach, which is to be implemented while one is within the abyss or beyond it. So by this, I mean that when we are pushing our magical consciousness into the highest forms of thought, Saturn sits at the doorway into this abyss. And in that abyss, it's well known we're like, quote unquote, supposed to lose our ego and all sense of any concepts of duality that seem to exist in the manifested world at the same time. We lose all that. The abyss is said to be able to annihilate everything into one unified thought. And it's here that I feel that compassionless love starts to be empowered by a Saturn brother, because a brotherhood of Saturn desires this in the first place. They are entering the abyss with this in mind, to not be annihilated. So it's a state of being that seems to be where opposites unite. And before I go even deeper into this, I just want to say it's like where the Joker and the Batman can agree on the fact that they can't kill each other out of a heartless form of love.
I think it's also like, for me, I would relate it to like opposites coming together in union would be like someone who is dying of thirst, uniting with that which gives that sustenance. So water, for example, and that as someone who is thirsty comes to that water, whether you want to use the lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink analogy. If that refuses then to unite with that thing, it is a pathetic thing. So it would be a pitiful thing.
Flowers elaborates a little bit more on this. To read from the book, he says, quote, "It refers to both the love of the demiurge Saturnus, or the Gotos, we'll talk about that later, for his minions on Earth, that is, his stern testing, and to the kind of love that a Saturn brother should show towards others." So it's kind of like saying, love the Black Iron prison and love your cellmate in the Black Iron prison just the same.
Your rod and your staff comfort me, Daddy.
Or like love your thirst, because when your thirst is quenched, you rejoice. So you love your thirst for the union that it can bring you. And that's actually kind of thelemic with like the "for I am divided for love's sake."
Right.
Yeah,
which
this
has union.
separation is what makes the union so good. Because if we were all unified all the time in love and light, that's not a very fulfilling existence. So the whole fact that you yearn for something, that yearning energy is kind of what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Well, if it sounds like that's a lot to think about, it's because it is. And we're going to go into how Thelema gave everybody's brain so much to chew that we're still digesting it.
Bruh, my brain doesn't have teeth.
Yes,
We
it
all
does.
have it in cerebral dentata, they call it, in fact. But one of the most interesting things about the Fraternitas Saturni is that they did adopt Thelema as a philosophy, and it allowed them to think about these things in new and inventive ways, including what you're talking about.
I like that because it's like an evolution. It's not allowing itself to become boxed in with it or by it. It simply becomes united with it, which is actually also really in line with it.
In a way, he's saying some people enjoy the suffering at the individual and the mass level, and it's because it's like a challenge or something, and the Saturn brother knows they can prevail through it all. So they want to be tested so they can prove that they're still standing in the abyss or something like that, right? It's the ultimate test, across this abyss. This whole topic here is brought up much later in the book as Flowers starts to focus on the veneration of Friedrich Nietzsche, and he has a whole chapter on Nietzsche. Nietzsche is actually a Gnostic saint in the OTO's Gnostic Mass ritual, if you don't know that. But Flowers focuses on his philosophy for the Saturnian approach to love, and specifically how this relates to Nietzsche's infamous quote, "God is dead." Flowers asks, but what killed him? And in Nietzsche's own words, quote, "his pity or love for man." Because he started to give a shit is when he lost all his godly powers, right?
Yeah, man, I want my God to turn cities into salt. I want my angels with one wing dipped in blood. I want swords and fire and war and burnt offerings. All this new Jesus shit. It's lame.
Well, I think this is in line with the love without pity thing, because when you are subjected to witnessing that and then you become that, with Nietzsche, if he's looked at the state of the pathetic, the pitiable, and he's become one with that state of pathetic and pitiable, then is it really love? Or has he allowed himself to stifle his own momentum towards the sacred nature of life through that? And that's actually all throughout that dialogue. And if you pay closer attention, he does describe his receiving of that knowledge as the place where he received it as being sacred. So he hasn't totally forsaken the notion. He's acknowledged the notion that people don't acknowledge that notion, or they've lost sight of a deeper connection to it.
Right, and it's found in Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, just if you want to read up on that yourselves. Flowers explains it a little bit more, and this is an excerpt from it. He says, quote, "A pitiful love is one in which the lover is annihilated by the beloved. Love without pity is where the lover, or magician, creates his beloved out of his own self. In many ways, then, the FS addition of these two words, pitiless love, to the whole Thelemite formula put a whole new perspective on the philosophy. Rather than seeking self-annihilation beyond the threshold, the Saturnian brother seeks to become his own god. Crowley never tired of calling those who seemed to him to endorse this path of non-self-annihilation the Black Brothers, or the Brothers of the Left-Hand Path. But perhaps the Great Beast, too, was one of these, yet denied it even to himself, and thus, when confronted with the ultimate moment of truth, was consequently perplexed."
I can hear some Thelemites right now. It's like, no, he didn't really say that. But it actually does explain what Flowers is saying, why in his commentaries of the Book of the Law, he talks about the Black Brotherhood and the Osirian Brotherhood, because he knew these folks, and he's sort of accusing them of doing it wrong. And it sort of makes sense now, where he's like, oh, these Germans went and took my stuff, and they did it wrong. It's Black Brothers, them and their Saturn stuff. Well, we'll see how that turns out, though. It gets pretty deep.
So just one more little bit of my own personal insight off script a little. In modern Batman comics, there is the Batman who laughs, who is like a combination of both the Joker and the Batman. This entity does become a multiversal god level threat that challenges Dr. Manhattan, like in the fabrics of the cosmos, existing or not. I think this is like super spot on, with Batman being Nosferatu, Joker being the man who laughs, both German expressionist films from the 1920s that may or may not have relationships to this whole Saturnian approach to, I am not going to be annihilated in the abyss. I am going to be a god. I'm going to make my own love because I'm that powerful.
There's a 90% probability that the stuff you loved in childhood found its roots in this bizarre intellectual pre-World War II German landscape of occultism.
And I can't help but find a little bit of this stuff in the Book of the Law, at least based off of the colors that are present. Line 50 in chapter 2 of the Book of the Law, Nuit says, "Blue am I, and gold in the light of my bride." So that's like Batman, classic Batman, right? Blue and gold. "But the red gleam is in my eyes, and my spangles are purple and green." So that purple and green is a little bit of the Joker energy kind of mixing up here. Meditate on that however you feel. You know, I just see a lot of this Batman and Joker stuff actually being magical in a very Saturnian way.
Well, Kenneth Grant would agree with you. He would call Batman the god of night, and there's going to be an aspect of all those archetypes in our story today. And The Man Who Laughs, of course, you mentioned, is early German expressionistic cinema, which then, of course, leaked into Batman. So before we get there, though, to start painting the picture of who the Fraternitas Saturni is and what makes them special from other occult orders, there's three distinct, unique aspects of their doctrine. The first is the astrological teaching of Saturnus as the demiurge, ruling over the present age of cosmic evolution, namely the age of Aquarius. Second, there's a strongly Luciferian aspect of this doctrine. And third, the teachings of sexocosmology and sexual occultism, the yoga of dark light, as it is called in these theories, are central to the Fraternitas Saturni. But how did it come to be? What were its roots? How far back does its history go? Who are the relevant players? Let's talk a little bit about how the Brotherhood of Saturn got started. So, Grandmaster Gregorius, he was said to have related the old Germanic high god Wotan to the Saturnian principle of the Greco-Roman world Fatum, or Latin for fate. Now, in the documents which detail this relationship, Wotan is spelled photon, which implies a link between the two. This photon is seen as the all-ruling principle of fate, which does not itself succumb to the ultimate twilight of the gods. You know, like a principle of the universe. It would later be emphasized that the order's true roots were in ritual of the Roman Saturnalia, which was practiced around the time that we practice Christmas today, and is in fact the origin of many of its traditions, like feasting, gift-giving, the wealthy giving to the poor, drinking copious amounts of alcohol, playing games, screaming and singing in the streets, and generally having a good time. I think it's important to remember this aspect of Saturn as we continue continue onward, as spooky as Saturn and the Brotherhood of Saturn may be, Saturn's good side is legendary, and he has always been beloved for good reasons. Anyone who works hard to play hard can appreciate Saturn's good side. Both Wotan and Saturn were celebrated at Yule time, so it's not hard to imagine that there was some overlap. Likewise, the Fraternitas Saturni documents suggested an earlier Scandinavian Brotherhood of Saturn, which was thought to be active during the 16 and 1700s, and was mostly concerned with mathematical and Pythagorean mysticism. You know, numbers and nerd stuff. Now, it's not this incarnation of the Scandinavian cube enjoyers was likely derived from an earlier one, but this is shrouded in mystery. According to said documents, the Brotherhood of Saturn was revived by Joseph Maria Honeronsky, who spent most of his life as a Polish expatriate in France, where he would become the magical initiator of Eliphas Levi, the fellow famous for drawing the now all too well-known depiction of the Baphomet. So, just to get started, the soil and brain matter from which the Brotherhood of Saturn rose from was the dude, Ronsky, who initiated Eliphas Levi, who was the guy who drew the Baphomet Satan that everyone's so afraid of, right? So the entire concept as it was presented by Levi was influenced by this current of magic. So this goes all the way back to that, which is kind of an important moment. Anyone who's into occultism will probably be interested in what that figure means. What did it mean to the Illuminati? Everyone seems to think they know what it means. The problem is they don't usually read the words that Eliphas Levi wrote about it, where he very clearly calls it the Goat of Mendes.
So what is the Goat of Mendes?
So just to touch back on something that I wrote previously for the Black Cross of Saturn episode, one of the forms of Osiris was as a ram-headed god known as Benebjed. Benebjed translates as Ba of the Lord of the Jed. So this ram was regarded as sacred to Osiris. Many depictions of Benebjed also show the deity with 4 ram heads, one facing in each direction. They often kept a sacred ram in Jedet as a living incarnation of Osiris, or a symbol of Benebjed. And likewise, in the city of Jedet, there was another prominent deity who was a fish goddess named Hatmahit. So she was sometimes referred to as an aspect of Isis, and her name, Hatmahit, translates to foremost of the fish, or she who is in front of the fishes. So we've got the goat and the fish of the Baphomet. So now Benebjed derives his authority through the marriage and union of his divine feminine consort, Hatmahit. And the Greeks actually referred to the city of Jedet as Mendes, and the ram deity of Jedet was then dubbed by the Greeks the Goat of Mendes. So when Eliphas Levi calls the Baphomet the Goat of Mendes, he's making a very direct reference to the marriage of Benebjedet and Hatmahit. So the union of the ram and the fish, or the goat and the fish, combined, it can be seen repeated in our well-known image of the Capricorn, which is half goat, half fish. Capricorn's ruling planet is also Saturn. So this pairing of deities was well known to the Greeks, and it was said to generate the child Horus, or the divine child, who according to conspiracy theorists everywhere is whose eye is really in the triangle. But this cocktail of symbolism is made more compelling by the fact that the Hebrew letter associated with the devil card in the tarot is ayin, and it means eye. So if you look at Osiris, whose ram form Benebjed, if you look at the hieroglyph for his name, it's a throne and an eye. And we also see a similar shape in the symbol for Saturn, like the actual planetary symbol or alchemical symbol for Saturn is shaped very much closely like the throne.
And as we know, the devil card prominently displays the Capricornian devil Baphomet. But that's really what it means. It harkens back to this ancient incarnation of the Saturnian energy, which it sounds like Eliphas Levi's initiator was very much into.
Well, and it's really easy to take this information and just immediately go, whoa, it's evil, it's bad, But again, there's no card in the tarot that is inherently evil. There are healthy representations of it. And as we can see with the Saturnalia or the Saturnian festivals, obviously there is worship of Saturn and has been and continues to this day because there are good sides to it. So I'm just saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Give the baby to Saturn.
Oh no.
This all speaks to the depth that this current of Saturnian magic had on the mysteries, like in general, and it serves to illustrate a rational connection between Saturn, Baphomet, the devil, and even Osiris. Ronsky sounds to have been deeply involved with all of the topics we love to discuss on the show: Kabbalah, Gnosticism, and Neoplatonism of every type. To add another interesting data point to his character sheet, Ronsky was also the leader of a group called the Antinomian Union.
You need people Saturn, I mean, so you can point your fucking fingers and say, that's the bad guy.
He believed the world would pass through 5 evolutionary stages, and his theories would open the way for the 5th and final stage. The final countdown, please.
So, to clarify, Ronsky was the person who passed along a lot of occult information to Eliphas Levi.
He's the one who
Correct?
initiated him. That's his Obi-Wan Kenobi. And this is the guy who comes up with the Brotherhood of Saturn idea. So it's pretty central to Western magic just as it is already. From the sounds of things, Ronsky is basically the always has been astronaut behind Crowley, who's behind John Gardner, who's behind Anton LaVey. And that being said, finding a strict historical connection between Ronsky and the Brotherhood of Saturn under Grigori is tentative at best, but there is a solid line of sight when we build the bridge with occult philosophy. For anyone secretly suspicious of Illuminati being worshippers of Satan, this is pretty much right over the target. It's also over the target for anyone who's inclined to see the devil or Saturn as something deeper with a holy quality unto its own.
Even in Freemasonry, which has German origins, even though the Scottish rite is the most known one, but even in all that Freemasonry tradition, we can find a potential current of bafflement or the devil being worshipped or praised almost blatantly right in front of us. We all know the iconic symbol Masons use, the capital letter G in the center of a square and a compass. Sometimes this G is swapped out for an I, which is usually radiating beams of light out. So what I'm saying here is that there seems to be a hidden connection between the letter G and the symbol of the I that's illuminated. Of course, this symbol has many meanings depending on the context, especially if you ask a Mason. The letter G is generally understood to represent God, the great architect, or even the ineffable light. Part of this riddle is that the letter G here cannot stand for God in any place where the word for God does not start with the letter G. Okay, so let's pause here for a quick sec. The letter G means God here because in English we spell God with the letter G as a first letter, and God is generally associated with some sort of divine light. A symbol used to reference light in occultism is the eye.
What's also interesting though about the G too is the glyph itself is reminiscent of a spiral, like an open spiral, which you could interpret as also phi or the Fibonacci sequence. It's the spiral of life in mathematics and geometry.
In reference to what you were saying about the G and the word for God, then, logically speaking, you would expect that if you went to a Masonic lodge in another country that spoke a different language, that it would be a different letter that you find, but it's not, correct?
No, it's just the first letter of their word for God to what that lodge might be doing.
You know what a G looks like? A capital one kind of looks like the eye of a ram or a goat.
Yep.
All right, so let's move on a next step, right? Because the symbol it unravels like a fractal. The eye in the triangle is sometimes called the eye of providence, aka the all-seeing eye, the eye of all. Consider now that Masons are huge fans of Solomon's magic and thus the Hebrew language. The Hebrew word / letter for I is ayin, and this is the 16th letter. All right, now put your tinfoil hats on. So the letter associated with the devil card in the tarot is ayin. The I and the devil are connected. So ayin is the 16th letter, right? If we reduce 16 down to a simpler number, that is 1 plus 6, we get 7. 7 is special in occultism because it's a divine number for many reasons. But what is the 7th letter of the English alphabet? It's G.
What?
So, in summary, G equals God, which is the I, which is ayin, which is the devil, and this is all a devil-worshipping secret order of light, which sounds like Lucifer. Does that make sense?
It is. But if we go back to what Hecka was trying to tell us in the Black Cross of Saturn episode, it links back to 7 yet another way that it doubles down on the meaning you just told us about.
Right. So, like, if you go into ancient Egyptian texts or depictions, you'll find that the number 7 is directly related to Osiris. And a lot of times this is depicted visually by Osiris resting on what is a bier or like a bed. And that bed is a lion. And the word for lion is Sabah, which also happens to be the word for the number 7. So Sabah relates to Shabbat or Shabbatai or the Sabbath. It's a perfected work. It's the cubic throne. And it's also, I just want to push back a little bit because because, again, the idea of devil worshipping secret orders of light is really easy to reject, being like, the devil or Satan. But if you really want to understand it in a way that actually is acknowledging of the beauty in the universe, you also have to look into the idea of Set before, because Satan himself has been demonized, or the devil himself has been demonized. And that entire ideology has become, I feel, very twisted. Whereas I think the Brotherhood of Saturn acknowledges a lot of things that people kind of gloss over and rectifies it in much the same way that the Egyptians did.
I agree. They do balance the dark and the light. It's a big part of who they are.
I mean, it's a secret order of light, right? So being like, bad, 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 Satan, Satan. It's like, well, it's also an order of light. And maybe if it's immediately rejected, maybe looking into what Lucifer actually means.
Right. And even if it's Satan or the adversary, obviously he is a product of creation of the big G. That is an aspect of the wholeness, right, by proxy. So Satan is here to play a part. Lucifer is here to play a part. And who's to say there's not a shining light found within this kind of study? Like, it's not necessarily like good versus evil, especially where they go with their studies like into the abyss, and you have non-duality going on. So it's just like one aspect of God, which is everything that's ever been created ever, and that gives human beings free will to choose it during the time that they're alive. Like, all of this relates to Saturn, so it's just an aspect of the one source, God.
Yeah, and the harmonizing of that duality into a perfected work, it also relates to Osiris, as Osiris perfected, and I see that's reflected here as well.
Yeah.
Yes, like, okay, so in Freemasonry, you have the rough and the perfected ashlars. That is exactly the symbolism we're talking about. And there, it's like, oh, it's ooky spooky, Saturn, Satan, Osiris. Like, dude, they're talking about perfecting your character. Like,
yeah,
do good in business, don't screw people over, don't cheat on your wife, be a good friend, be a good family member, you know, all the boring shit, right? That you're supposed to do as a normal Christian anyway. So it's not all bad. Let's start there. I think it's important, but it's also important to point out how deep the Saturn, Satan, Osiris, and Lucifer stuff really does go into occultism. If you're interested in Baphomet and getting to the deeper side of Baphomet, this is the conversation for you. There's a lot to unpack, and we're going to get to all of it. Now, Flowers argues that these hidden currents of occultism, stoked by Rosicrucianism and the Bavarian Illuminati, they evolved into foreign incarnations, like the Golden Dawn and Ordo Templi Orientis, which were then re-imported back into the German-speaking world, transformed into their more popular forms, and rerouted themselves with enhanced vigor. Long story short, for centuries, the Germans have been elevating their worship of the devil to a high art form, and we could all learn from it. Parallel to all this were two other German occult movements. One was a proliferation of a sort of quixotic masonry, or Winkelmaurerei, as it's called in German. Sorry if I butchered it. These are like the Masonic lodges, but with no legitimate link to bona fide masonry. They were all the rage at this time. Hey, are you going to your lodge? Yes, I'm going to my lodge. Would you like to come to mine? No. They seem to meet on the same day. We must have to join another lodge together. And there was like, everyone had their own little, it was everywhere. It was very popular. Now, another tantalizing development was the occult philosophy of the Viennese scholar Franz Settler. He lived from 1884 to 1942. And he usually wrote under the pseudonym Dr. Musalam,
which pretty much means Dr. Perfect.
As it turns out, Dr. Musalam is going to be very important for building out the philosophy of the Fraternitas Saturni.
In his esoteric endeavors, he was responsible for the construction of a complete magical system based on a peculiar neo-pagan pantheon, at the head of which stood Adonis. Musalam equated Adonis with Satan or the devil and took a markedly anti-Christian stance. The primary mode of worshiping Adonis was through sexual enjoyment, both heterosexual and homosexual. You mean bisexual. Or pansexual, I guess. He overtly stated that Adonism is the worship of the devil by means of erotic activity. Dr. Musalam formed the
Dunnische Gesellschaft, so it's the Adonistic Society.
Yeah, I'm not good on German. So this organization was active between 1925 and 1931 and published numerous written works, including a journal called Dido and an almanac called Adonis. Although the organization had definite aims and methods, it did not require any vows or restrictions. This is because the whole purpose of the movement was to be the liberation of humanity from the inhibitions and limitations of all kinds. It was a libertine philosophy coupled with magical ideology.
I kind of like this idea because it's very similar to my oath, that is, I make no oaths.
Yeah, I feel that.
If I were to have it my way in a lodge, I would just hope that like-minded individuals all joined and we all thought the same, kind of, and we were somewhat related in our true will. We don't need to make an oath for any particular individual goal in the big order. It's like, no, we're already in without having to say so.
Well, we can see that these are ideas that Thelema would play with throughout its various incarnations. Jack Parsons was very into this whole idea, and they really tried to work it out for quite some time. And it started all the way back here in the German-speaking world before World War I. Now, Franz Sattler believed the dissemination of his occult philosophy would usher in a new golden age, which he hoped would reach its inception around the year 2000. So now.
Oh, what a coincidence.
Right?
So on this topic, Flowers notes, this age of world salvation was to be symbolized by the serpent and characterized by the qualities of freedom and truth.
Although Wikipedia says Sattler's claims are entirely dubious, he claimed Adonism was an ancient religion followed by the Chaldeans, the Phoenicians, the Persians, the Egyptians, and the Greeks, with aspects of it surviving into Yazidism. According to Sattler, the original Adonis scriptures were being kept in a large temple near Bit Nur, the House of Light, in Nurstan, Afghanistan.
Yazidism is that peacock Lucifer religion, right?
Yes, and there are some overlaps with him and Saturn. He's basically the Saturn entity of that religion, and there really is an ancient overlap between these ideas, which is pretty cool.
Adonism is pretty wild. It's possibly worthy of its own episode. It's a practice that recognizes 5 principal gods: Belus, Biltis, Adonis, Dido, and Moloch. Yes, that Moloch. Note that in this context, Adonis is Christian Satan, but the good guy, versus Moloch, who is one of the primary reasons why us humans suffer under the tyranny that is Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Hence why Adonism is an anti-Christian order, which spills over into the Fraternitas Saturni as well, being anti-Christian.
All I can think about, because they worship Adonis, like the new wave of the Saturni Brotherhood is basically the kids at school. They're like, I'm look maxing, hush, I'm mewing. Like I'm trying to get a good strong jaw and look great.
Yeah, maybe just
Like,
a little bit.
There are memes that are popping up that actually like totally fall under this entire principle.
I just think it's really important to pause temporarily before moving on, because Malachor called them an anti-Christian organization of spirituality. And that does not mean that they want to war against. It means that they have a different opinion and a different practice that is naturally in opposition to Christianity. And if you look at the related Yazidi, they themselves have not really been warmongers on this behalf. Even though they could be considered anti-Christian or anti-whatever, they've often had to go into hiding and run away from that. So I don't lightly throw anti-Christian around in relation to this, because it doesn't mean it's antagonistic and violent towards it. It's just vehemently oppositional.
Well, they believe that the god of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is Moloch, who is evil as hell. So they see their god as a devil or their devil. So yeah, it is like antinomian. I don't think they were actually violent towards Christians, though. So it's,
It's more like a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament side of things.
Well, I mean, it does draw upon the idea of like, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, right?
Yes.
I mean, to bad guys, they're the good guys, whatever.
Just to bring up One Piece, Luffy doesn't like being called a hero. He's the best protagonist. He's the devil.
Now, it's a bit Gnostic in this regard, with all the mainstream religions falling under the influence of a wrathful, life-hating tyrant god who, as you mentioned, is identified with Moloch, sometimes pronounced Malkos, as the myth goes, is the third child of the original male and female pair of gods who arose out of the primeval chaos. Alongside Malkos was born his brother Adonis and his good sister Dido, who strongly resemble the pairing of Osiris and Isis. It sounds like they do humping as as well. The result is a pairing of fairly traditional pagan motifs injected into a Gnostic framework, with Adonis serving as the Luciferian liberator god. So, actual real-life Luciferianism was going on and even quite popular in Germany during the creation of the Fraternitas Saturni. We can only assume a big portion of this DNA was shoehorned into the philosophy of the Brotherhood of Saturn and its goals.
Basically, Flowers is making the point that there was secret German cults, and of course this is the spawning bed for the FS to rise out of. Consider the teachings of the OTO and the Golden Dawn, which were formed originally in Germany, but they rose to much more public popularity in places like England and France before returning back to Germany to their quote-unquote roots a couple years later, right?
Yes.
And so once they returned, it struck a deep chord with the German secret cults that were already there. It's basically what's being said here, right?
Yes. Among these shadowy lodges was the Cult of 99, or the FOGC, the Freemasonic Order of the Golden Centrium. Supposedly founded in 1840 by a wealthy German industrialist, the FOGC was an openly demonological order that claimed to remain in close contact with the tetrad of archdemons, Barzabel, Astaroth, Belial, and Asmodeus. According to Flowers,
The service of these entities was to provide the initiates of the order with untold personal power, influence, and wealth.
You mean it's all about sex, or?
Of course not. They're under the illusion that they owe their money and success to membership in the order.
Do they still meet?
Every year.
according to sources inside the Fraternitas Saturni and others like Franz Bardon, the FOGC was a sort of cult of human sacrifice. The idea was that the lodge operated at a capacity of 100 members, 99 human, and at least one empty seat for the daemonian itself. Every year, on St. John's Day, the members would gather together at night, and if no members had died since the previous year, they would draw lots for who the yearly sacrifice would be. The initiated chosen for the honor would then be given a poison to drink that would complete the sacrificial act.
Try to act like you was drinking sparkling water before you came out here.
If refused, the initiate would be targeted remotely by a dreaded machine known as the Tepaphon, which allowed a sufficiently skilled operator to will his target to die no matter where they were upon the earth. This machine is apparently mentioned within Fraternitas Saturni documents, and even appears in colorful fashion alongside the FOGC in the autobiographical work of Franz Bardon, Frabrato. Franz Bardon, the source of much of this information himself, is said to have received occult training by Friedrich Wilhelm Kunscher, a leader of the Adonis movement alongside Sattler, so he was all up in that business.
So, just for the sake of clarity, this human sacrifice ritual by the FOGC, was that embraced or not embraced by the Fraternitas Saturni?
As far as we know, that was not a thing. But I'm telling you, this was a popular idea in Germany at the time, and Franz Bardon, like, this was the bad guys in his story. Like, Eyes Wide Shut, the FOGC is gonna get you.
Right. So the Fraternitas Saturni appears to be not on that page. Like, they appear to be against it.
Well,
correct?
they grew out of the soil in which all this stuff is gestating. And there are elements of the Fraternitas Saturni that borrow from things like the FOGC. Like, they have a daemonium that they use as a group egregore that is like a member of the group. I don't think they kill anybody, though.
Okay.
Hide your kids, hide your wife. They worshiping Satan out here.
Well, it makes sense why elites get bunkers underground to hide in, because perhaps they choose to leave the order one day. They got to hide somewhere and fake their death. So, I mean, it makes sense it was a popular idea because they probably still do it today.
Another important figure at the time was Theodor Russ. He lived from 1855 to 1924, and he would eventually become the head of the German OTO during this time. The full story is that he was collecting other independent Masonic orders like playing cards. He even tried to revive the Bavarian Illuminati a number of times. He purchased the charters for the ancient primitive rite of Memphis and the Egyptian rite of Mishram. He got those from an English Mason named John Yarker, which he unified all together into a singular order in 1902. This collecting and unifying of orders seemed to be a big concern for Russ at the time, and it reflected the sentiment rife in the German occult scene at the time, which believed it possible to unify all religious, all spiritual, and all occult practice into a giant singular system. He eventually teamed up with the well-known theosophists Franz Hartmann and Heinrich Klein, who pulled OTO founder Karl Kellner into the fold. These four men, Russ, Hartmann, Klein, and Kellner, would then build the German OTO using sex magic secrets that Kellner supposedly picked up from tantrists in India, and also the American occultist Pascal Beverly Randolph's organization in France. So, if you squint and look really hard at the details, we can see an unbelievably potent cross-pollination between various different occult currents blending wisdom from both the East and the West into a current of energy that would shape the world we live in today. Shortly after getting the ball rolling in the OTO, Kellner kicked the bucket, and Russ became the head of the OTO, which flourished like it never had before.
In 1912, Russ openly published the true nature of the work of the OTO in the Oriflamme publication he was the editor of, saying, "Our order possesses the key which opens up all the Masonic and Hermetic secrets, namely the teaching of sexual magic, and this teaching explains, without exception, all the secrets of Freemasonry and all systems of religion."
And then, like, Freud comes along and says the same thing. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, Russ and Crowley actually met, and Russ actually accused Crowley of leaking the OTO's Grand Arcanum, this very super secret sex magic. But Crowley replied saying that, well, he had discovered the secrets himself, which impressed Russ so much that he handed the OTO over to Crowley before summarily dying the following year, just like Kellner had. But that wasn't before he converted to Thelema himself, so apparently he was quite impressed. I sort of wonder what that conversation was like.
So a couple weeks ago, Lon Milo Duquette actually brought this up in one of his Facebook videos, his daily things that he does, which are really great. You should check them out. But according to Lon Milo Duquette, it was the 36th chapter of Aleister Crowley's Book of Lies, titled The Star Sapphire Ritual, that sparked a response from Royce. This is, of course, a modified thelemic version of the Golden Dawn's hexagram ritual. Royce somehow had read this yet-to-be-published ritual and eventually paid a visit to Crowley in London, and he was demanding answers for this transgression of the OTO secrets.
How did you know that we pull out the penis and wave it in the hexagram? How, Crowley, how?
And it's this meeting where Russ accused Crowley of leaking the ultimate secret of sex magic in ritual form. Duquette says that this corresponds to a 9th degree initiation into the OTO.
That means you have to suck at least 9 dicks to get this secret, normally, under normal circumstances.
And of course, you know, the accusation was that this was released to the public without approval from the actual OTO, right? And Crowley simply stated that he could have not willingly or purposefully spilled the beans of the OTO secrets because, well, he just didn't know them in the first place.
I wave my dick around however I want. I wave my dick around during every ritual. This is the secret of my magic, you silly German man.
You know, Crowley is very well known and a legend for his deep insights to such occulted ideas that his contemporaries vouched, you know, that he had abilities and insights that were like beyond human knowledge, right?
I'm a fan of the Book of the Law. He was clearly connected to something. He was doing a lot of intense magic during this period.
So for Russ, this only meant that Crowley must take the oaths of the OTO and become a member. Eventually, of course, becoming the Order's master, the leader. Now, there is no documentation or official writings from the OTO on exactly what chapter Russ pointed out as being the big secret revealed. There is even some evidence that chapter 88 of the Book of Lies might be the one in question. That whole thing is a little weird to talk about, especially with 88 being there. If you don't know what that means, good for you. But it's none other than Robert Anton Wilson who provides us with a much more interesting option. In Robert Anton Wilson's book, The Cosmic Trigger, he believes that it is chapter 69, giggity, of the Book of Lies, called The Way to Succeed and The Way to Suck Eggs.
I love Bob.
Right, but, you know, this is in the Book of Lies, you know, chapter 69, to succeed and to suck eggs, okay? Robert Anton Wilson explains how the number 69, the words talking about sucking, and the name of the chapter are all puns that allude to oral sex. The 69 act itself is also a sort of mixing of the roles for both involved in this particular, you know, way of enjoying each other. There's no babies at the end of it when everybody has their satisfaction, however you want to term that. But of course, this is also what is going on magically during the hexagram ritual or the star sapphire ritual. It's the arrow pointing up and the arrow pointing down, heaven and earth coming together, right?
I'm all about 69ing with God, so you don't have to sell me on it. I just know there's some people who are like, what the f is he talking about?
So both chapters 36 and 69 are, in fact, about the hexagram ritual, if you go and check out the Book of Lies. But the whole book is written in very occult manner. Every word or part of the ritual or paragraph that you're reading isn't explained at all, really. And in these chapters, the ritual's explained, but poetically. Instead of step by step, you grab this and then do that. He says it much more profanely.
If you're not sure what he's saying, it's probably semen.
So Crowley's own commentary on these chapters end with, it would be unwise to elaborate further on official rituals of the OTO. That is found in a lot of his works because you have to kind of pay to get into the order to get the access to the official library, right? If that's what you want to do, that's how you do it.
You got to pay to learn how to magically suck buttholes, okay?
Right. So to put a bow on this little section here, the real interesting part is that the Book of Lies, it was officially published in 1912 or 1913, and Russ's visit to Crowley is documented to have occurred in 1910. So how did Russ know that Crowley even wrote the ritual in the first place? How did this information get leaked out? Crowley even wrote about this conundrum in his writings called Confessions years later. He says, quote, "My entire life was changed in its most important respect, and by incident which could not possibly have occurred."
They were spying on him in the astral because they were tapped in, man.
He was tapping in.
They were all tapping in. I thought it was interesting how fast Kellner died after giving the OTO to Russ, and then how fast Russ kicked the bucket after he handed the OTO to Crowley. This is what they talk about when they talk about egregores. Like, is the egregore, the OTO, like sucking the vitality out of you, and then the second it doesn't need you anymore, you're just like dead, like a vampire. Like, now, anyway, whatever the case may be, Thelema, well, it, infected German occultism from that point forward, and it would eventually become the de facto operating system of the Order of Saturn's philosophy, which, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting caveats to the whole conversation. Crowley also, besides the OTO, took notice of the Pansophical Lodge, or Pansophia, which was headed by Heinrich Trenker, or Brother Rectenartus. It had originally begun as a loosely organized study group in Berlin shortly after the First World War. A formalized group called the Grand Pansophical Lodge of Germany, Orient, Berlin would eventually form, with Trenker acting as the Grand Master, allowing him to gather all of the disparate lodges and orders that subscribe to Pansophical ideals into one big unified order. From what I understand, Thelema caused a gargantuan schism within the Grand Pansophical Lodge between newly converted Thelemites and the old school Christian occultists. This is what would eventually cause its secretary, Gregory A. Gregorius, to leave with a handful of other Thelemites and found the Fraternitas Saturni in 1926, becoming its Grand Master. This ultimately was to coincide with the official dissolution of the entire Pansophical Lodge on Maundy Thursday of 1926. Taking a step back and seeing it for what it was, Crowley and his unleashing of this new magical aeon through his channeled Book of the Law totally restructured the entire German occult landscape, which was kind of a big deal. Now, this big change it elicited, it cannot be understated because it hinges upon a prophecy which various occult schools of the theosophical milieu had come to embrace. Like, at this time in history, the entire occult world, because of theosophy, was buzzing with anticipation for the coming of a world teacher, somebody who would lead the world into a new age of balance by way of their wise teachings. In times past, these types of prophecies had led to the rise of figures like Jesus Christ and Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. Naturally, Aleister Crowley was destined to reach towards such a monstrous slice of clout. Besides, a dead Egyptian priest had informed Crowley that he was in fact the chosen one to promulgate a spiritual revolution on Earth under the banner of Thelema, and by golly, this all seemed to be lining up perfectly. From what I can tell, it seemed like the Book of the Law, especially after it was translated to German, seemed to strike a powerful chord with all who came into contact with it, with one half converting nearly instantly and the others, well, being totally repulsed. To address the issue, all the big occult leaders in Germany combined with Crowley and a few members of his entourage, Leah Herzig, Dorothy Olson, and Norman Mudd, they would hold what was called the Veda Conference. I didn't notice how much that sounds like Vader. Anyway, now, it was essentially to figure out if all of these high-level occultists, like all the ones we've been talking about, all the big wigs, if they were going to decide to organize under Tomegatherion, the Great Beast, 666, as the prophesied world teacher, and march unified into a new Thelemic Aeon of Horus as one. Kind of cool, right? In fact, the conference issued an official statement. It was called the Testament of the Seeker, which read, "The teacher of the world whose appearance was predicted for this year, and who has been awaited by all true seekers, and especially by those
of the Theosophical Society has appeared at this exact time in the person of Tomegatherion.
Aleister Crowley.
We, the undersigned, have seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears, and we know certainly and without lies that he is in truth the transmitter of the word after which the soul of humanity thirsts.
Wow. 5-star review.
I always like to think when people they have the ears to hear, it's rabbit ears, all right? To hear the true divine words, you must have your rabbit ears on.
But if you'd like to know how all this panned out,
Concluding in the World Wars, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you this extended episode, it'll get you all of our extended episodes going back before 2020. I'll get you a 5x5 high quality vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art, which is curiously like the Baphomet figure that we're going to be talking about in the extended show and in the whole German. You'll see. I'll even send you the secret keys to our Discord server where you can talk to us about all the weird, evil, Baphometic things that have happened to you since you got your sticker. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew, pew, pew.
Pew.